Welcome to the first Public Safety Committee meeting of 2008. I'm Jack Weiss. I'm joined by Dennis Zine, Greg Smith, and Ed Reyes. Colleagues, we have an agenda that is filled with grant requests and rather typical sorts of reports. I would propose that we could hear on consent items 3, which is grant, 4, which is a grant, 5, which is a grant, 7, we could do a note and file on a Prop Q report, 8 is a grant, so I'd propose we could do those on consent, unless you want to call any of those special.
Nope. Second that? Yeah. Very well.
All right. So without objection, those will be approved or noted and filed on consent. Items 9 and 10, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I believe are here because the City Attorney's Office believes that it's, thank you very much for coming this far, believes that it's not sufficient for a council member to put in a motion to draft an ordinance. The City Attorney's Office believes it's necessary to then have a committee schedule an item and have a committee say, draft an ordinance, before an ordinance gets scheduled. It's my hope that one day, when a council member puts in an ordinance request, the City Attorney's Office will draft the ordinance for the council member. I think that would be easier. Having said that, I've scheduled items 9 and 10 so the committee can ask the City Attorney's Office to draft the ordinance.
So moved.
Okay?
That's a good idea.
So those are going to be drafted. One day, we won't have to do that.
Efficient.
Until then, here we are. Let's please call item 1.
Morning, John White, City Clerk. Item 1, Police Department to report. To present a verbal report relative to the status of DNA testing, backlog, and cold hits.
And I apologize, Ms. Stengel points out that item 6 should be continued until January 28. We don't want anyone who's here on item 6 to have to wait around for that. So if, without objection, we'll continue item 6 till January 28. And on DNA, pleased to see all of you. I won't deliver my speech, but please go ahead and tell us what you have by way of an update or facts and data for us.
Okay, good morning. I'm Lieutenant Morris, in charge of the Cold Case Section of Robbery Homicide Division, and I have our year-end stats for 2007 of DNA hits versus 2006. As far as our totals, our total CODIS hits for this year versus last year, 322 versus 156 for a 106% increase.
I'm sorry, versus 100?
156 total for 2006.
Okay, so in 2006, there were 100, tell us exactly what the 156, what that number represents.
That represents the total number of hits in CODIS, in the combined
Homicide and sexual assault?
for all the CODIS hits, period.
Okay.
Total hits, robbery, homicide, burglary, whatever was submitted, that represents that number.
And in 2000, and the difference between 06 to 07 is more than a doubling of that.
Yes.
Take it away.
Okay. We had a total of 38 homicide hits in 2007 versus 16 for 2006 for a 138% increase. And for sexual assault hits, 104 in 2006 versus 166 in 2007 for a 60% increase. And the cold, in 118 others, and that represents the robberies and burglaries. There were 118 in 2007 versus 32 in 2006 for a 269% increase. And burglaries account for 86 of the hits of those 118.
We're joined for the record by Councilmember Parks. Any other data or facts you want to share with us?
Did you want to give the total number of crimes?
Okay, then, and additionally, what we have for you is, in response to some questions that you posed for us at the last meeting, with regards to the number of sexual assaults that were committed or reported. We have that data as well. And so for year-end stats for 2007, the number of sexual assaults actually committed or reported was 803, and that's through November the 30th because we don't have the current stats as of December yet. And the number of rape kits collected, SID is going to talk to that. And then for us, the number of cases in which the identification of the perpetrator is at issue, we're unable to determine that at this time without speaking with each investigating officer. And the number of rape kits sent / requested by detectives to be tested, again, SID will speak to those two issues.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Yes.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
You're welcome.
Greg Matheson, SID Laboratory Director. The total number of sexual assault kits that were taken into possession by our property division in 2007 actually comes to 1,308. Significant difference from the number of sexual assaults that we have reported. However, the 1,308 also includes homicides. It also includes a number of crimes that don't, I believe, come under the designation of a sexual assault. There's a lot of different penal codes in which a kit might be collected. So we do know for a fact that property took into possession 1,308 sexual assault kits for one crime or another. In 2007, we received a total of 545 requests for analysis in sexual assault cases from department detectives. Of that 545, 399 of them were for crimes that occurred in 2007. The remaining 146 were for crimes that occurred prior to 2007. As far as what the laboratory tested, in 2007, the serology DNA unit analyzed 419 sexual assault cases. Of that number, 185 were for crimes that occurred in 2007. The remaining 234 were for crimes that occurred prior to 2007.
Okay. Anything else by way of data or stats that you wanted to provide us with today? I appreciate that you probably have all this written down so that I don't have to rely on what I scratched down and we can look at it and sort of ponder what it means. I mean, I think what's the one thing that is very clear is the constant increase in demands being placed on the lab for scientific analysis work. I mean, that regardless of how many cases you clear or regardless of whether the captain has the resources he needs to then do the follow-up work, that trend line seems pretty well established. How are you coping with that trend line, Captain?
In terms of having enough sufficient personnel to do the work?
Yes.
I think
Mr. Zine's question from a month ago, if I may rephrase it, was what do you have in terms of resources to do the necessary investigative follow-up when hits occur so that cases can be made and presented for trial?
the resources that have been provided by the council and the mayor so far puts us in a position where we can be effective in terms of responding to hits when they're brought to our attention. And we're in a good place right now. The concern that I would have would be for next year and the years after, when all arrests will be subject to, under Prop 69, the whole process of providing the sample and requiring the analysis, those analysis being entered into the database, because then we'll really see a significant number of hits. And another concern that we have outside of the DNA concern has to do with print hits. We're going to see, and we're starting to see, as many hits being brought to our attention from IAFIS as we are with DNA. So that's a whole nother issue that we have to, from a city standpoint, and certainly from a law enforcement standpoint, we have to be prepared to deal with with that information as it was brought to our attention. And again, as I mentioned in our last meeting, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the suspect, but we have to make that determination because it very likely could be that suspect. And that's why this cold case special session is so important. We simply can't allow that kind of information to simply queue up and just sit in a pile. There has to be very aggressive action in terms of looking at that information and make a determination what it means. Because you could have, and I know with some of the work that we're doing now, you could have so many cases that are connected and that point to a single perpetrator. I mean, we were working on some case-to-case investigations where we have a number of incidents that are linked by DNA, but we don't know who the suspect is. But at some point in time, that suspect may be arrested, and his DNA will be taken. It'll be entered into the system, and then we'll be in a position to clear multiple cases that involve homicide and sexual assault.
And additionally, you have to remember also that we handle at cold case only a portion of these hits. We also track, though, those hits that go out to the divisions that are handled by the investigative entity that initiated the case. And so even though we are monitoring those, we only handle a portion of them.
Oh, I understand. Mr. Smith?
I just one real question that came in mind when you were talking, Captain Jackson, about you've got multiple hits on a case, you could clear it, but there's no DNA. Is there a loop in the system that you've now put information in on DNA footprint that says if the state picks it up somewhere in the future, it connects backwards to the case?
If you're speaking to the issue of our obtaining a sample, having a profile developed, when it's entered into the database, it goes into CODIS, which is a nationwide umbrella for a number of databases, and it'll connect. I think I mentioned last time it's about forensic evidence and computer technology, and when those, and essentially that's what CODIS is. We'll put in the profile, we'll enter it into a computer database, and then it looks for the connectors, and then it'll say, based on the profile that's already in the system and that you've just entered, it points to this person, and then we have to begin the investigation to determine.
But the question is, does it go backwards? So that if we put a profile in the system and find nothing, that it sits there, and 2 years from now, if they get a match, it now notifies us we got somebody now.
Absolutely. The profile stays in place. Whenever a new offender is uploaded into the system, it searches against all the unknown profiles from cases.
Correct.
It's a constant cross-checking. We actually receive hits on from the California Cold Hit Program that we were involved in 2002, 2003, 2004. As somebody comes into the possession of, the criminal justice system, their profile's taken, it's searched, and it'll hit against those old ones.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I got a couple.
Mr. Zucker and Mr. Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The number of hits, 106% increase from 06 to 07, significant impact. Was that because of additional personnel, additional resources, the new lab? What do we attribute to that increase?
Well, the increase is probably most attributable to Proposition 69 and the increased number of offenders that are being placed into the system. I mean, we are increasing the number of case profiles we're putting in, but the number of offenders is huge. Our California State database is the largest in the country now, sitting at about 1 million profiles.
Can I just interrupt for just 1 second, because just so Mr. Zine understands, because it gets jargony very quickly. When there is a crime of violence, rape, homicide, DNA evidence can be collected from the scene. That's one bit of DNA evidence. But what's happening in the state of California now as a result of Prop 69 a few years ago, is swabs are being taken from violent offenders and from inmates in California state prisons. As those profiles are being uploaded into the state computer, what we find now is that in 2006, when LAPD sent its evidence in from the hot cases, from cases that are hot, that are on the ground right now, 156 times we got a hit. We found out who the bad guy was. By 2007, more people had been swabbed who are in state prison, and more of those swabs had been uploaded into the state's computer, so when you sent in, I don't know, let's just say for the sake of argument, roughly the same number of cases, or you tested roughly the same number of cases, maybe a little more, you ended up getting hits twice as often because there are more bad guys who have their DNA profiles resident in the computer. And so that's the trend, is that because you have more and more bad guys in the computer whose data is just sitting there, waiting for a case to come in, as Mr. Smith asked. And then, as Captain Jackson pointed out, one day soon, you'll be swabbing arrestees. Then you'll have more and more and more of these bad guys, just their DNA sitting there, so when a violent crime occurs, you're more likely to get a hit. Sorry to interrupt, but sometimes it's an important point that sometimes, just because it gets very jargony, we all need to understand. That's where this trend is coming from. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So we're not bringing in more because of the people going through the criminal justice system. That's what's increased the numbers.
That, and you might get multiple hits on the same suspect
Right,
as
okay.
well.
Now, as far as the follow-up, and that's the issue I'm concerned about, to get these hits, to identify an individual, the personnel that you have assigned to robbery homicide division, you got the cold case unit, you got robbery homicide division, you got all the other entities within the department to do the follow-up. The detectives that go out there and start trying to identify, locate the individual. Have you received additional personnel in that arena? Because you mentioned that you've got sufficient folks, but as you get more hits, more suspects, someone's got to do the groundwork. Have you received additional folks in the detective section to accomplish that task?
Yes. The council and the mayor provided 8 additional detectives. The year prior, you provided 12. We are in...
Not the cold case unit necessarily, but I'm talking about overall for your detective squad to pursue these individuals once you identify them.
My sense is that historically, in terms of detectives, there's always been, I was a detective commanding officer in a number of divisions. We've never felt that we had enough detectives to do the work, and it's, particularly in the geographic areas, it's a pressure box. There are never enough detectives, not just to deal with cold case issues, but just your general crimes. It's a really tough position to be in. But other than that, I couldn't be more specific. I just don't know what each individual detective division is experiencing in terms of their staffing and their ability to manage all of their cases. But again, just based on my own experience, it's always tough in the areas. However, with respect to robbery homicide division, the resources that you provided, and going back to what Lieutenant Morris mentioned, we don't handle every single hit that comes in. Some go back to the geographic areas, but we do take a pretty sizable number, particularly on the sexual assault side, a number of those cases, and based on the resources that have been provided to date, we're in pretty good shape in terms of being able to manage those numbers. We're going to start to see the arrests come in. I think 2008 is going to be a good year for resolution regarding individuals being taken into custody, cases being filed, because we now, before you provided those resources, I think we only had 2 teams, and they were primarily dealing with homicide, but the hits were coming in. But now we're in a position where we really can get something done, and I think that this is a situation that is consistent with what we're going to see in the future. Cold case is cutting edge, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be here, and from a city standpoint and from a law enforcement standpoint, we really have to look at this new phenomenon in both eyes and recognize that we're going to have an appropriate response to it, because it's not going to go anywhere. As a matter of fact, it's going to get a little worse in terms of the challenge, not only for SID, but for the investigators that have to handle it.
Would it make a difference in your analysis of the level of resources that you had, level of staffing that you had, if you had someone like Mr. Smith being transferred over there on Friday? Do you think that could make an impact at all?
We are heavily recruiting him. He's a first-round draft choice. We definitely do need him.
That would be a benefit to all of us.
And Mr. Councilman, we'll take you as well.
I've already
No,
got mine.
just Smith.
I'm on the,
He wants to shoot.
I'm fugitive warrants, that's okay. Once you
That's
identify
a
them,
good
we'll
job.
catch them.
That's important.
Yeah, that's a good job.
But I think with our tracking system in place, we'll be able to assess at some point if it becomes overwhelming for the divisions, because they do have to respond to us when we send out the DNA hit. They have to respond to us as far as what they did in the form of a follow-up.
The concern I have is as we continue to recruit more and more officers, and we know the numbers are getting higher, and they get in patrol, and then everybody wants more personnel. Intelligence wants personnel, Homeland Security, and we keep peeling them off. And the basic responsibility, the officers in the black and white, the detectives in the divisions, the specialized detectives, but I know there's an emphasis on Homeland Security, and we see bodies going into that arena, which used to traditionally go into the other roles of law enforcement. So the concern I have is, well, you're doing all this work, and SID's working, and we're doing this, and we're getting these people, and the hit, and the identity, we're looking for this suspect, the bodies to go out there and apprehend those folks, for the detectives to clear that case, to take it to court, so justice can obviously take hold, is what the victims want and the families want. That was my concern, is that as we continue this build-up, we don't neglect that aspect of the detective function that do the groundwork to actually go out there and find the person. It's nice to say, looking for John Q. Citizen, well, where is he in the city of 4 million people? Or where is she in the city of 4 million people?
And I do appreciate your sense regarding that. Our problem, and we've talked about this quite a bit, our problem is CODIS tells us you have a crime, homicide or sexual assault or some other crime, or robbery. CODIS tells us that that person was there. So we have to act on that. He was there. Now, based on our experience, the small percentage of individuals commit a significant number of crimes in the city or throughout our society. By moving aggressively on those individuals that are identified, particularly if we can make a determination that they are in fact the suspect, prevents future crime. So it's almost like crime prevention in our discussion. So we really need to get into those investigations, make a determination that individuals' participation or involvement, and if we're able to build the case such that we can obtain a warrant, arrest them, then the city is better for it. Our victims are better for it. We make the city safer. So we really, plus from a moral standpoint, an ethical standpoint, I don't know that we get to look away. CODIS says that that person was there. I don't know that we get to look away, nor do I think, considering the violent nature of the crimes that we're looking at, I don't think that we have a lot of time to do it. We need to move very quickly and aggressively to find out who that person is and what his relationship is to the crime.
Thank you.
Mr. Parks, you had some questions.
I'm assuming that probably some of you will be at Budget and Finance today on that grant for DNA. And one of the things that maybe between now and then you could answer for us, it's an $871,000 grant, and about two-thirds of the money is being spent for overtime equipment and personnel resources. And I think at one of these previous meetings we had here, you tell us that if we go out to an outside vendor, that we can get those tests done for about $1,000 per test. And it just seemed an imbalance that if we're trying to reduce the workload, that if we can go with the grant and the total analysis, you would get about 870 cases analyzed, and it wasn't really clear as to why we're spending the money on overtime travel and equipment when our effort is trying to reduce the workload on DNA. And that would be something, and if you're coming to Budget and Finance, I'd just like to have you look at that and see what the answer is, because I think what the proposal is to reduce the number of cases, like 180 cases with that grant, but it was unclear why we were going in the equipment area when we're trying to reduce the workload. So at 1 o'clock we'll have that. And I just want to ask you if you could, because I'm sure one of you will be at that meeting.
I definitely will be, yes.
But maybe you could explain, get that information so we'd be aware of it.
Okay.
It's also my understanding is that, I've been talking with you guys for years about this, is I'd love to, outsource everything to get things done, but when you're talking about the screening aspect of a case, you can't just outsource all the evidence from your crime scenes. That's a point that you guys have made. I don't know if that relates to the answer to Mr. Parks' question or not.
Yeah, I think the issue there was that two-thirds of the money is going for travel, overtime, and equipment for 180 cases, and I'm just wondering, why are we buying equipment and travel and overtime if you can push some of those cases into the outside?
You want us to put the overtime back in the regular budget?
No.
Already? I don't think so.
It goes all into that analysis is what I'm trying to figure out. You get 800 cases done.
If it was all just for casework.
That's
but it's
right.
not just for casework, it's for pursuing criminals to other states and things like that, which is overtime travel expenses.
But again, if you could have that by the time you come to the budget fight, it'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
Mr. Reyes?
In terms of correlating geographically where we're finding these, how can I say this? My assumption is that our highest levels of violent crimes tend to occur in certain parts of the city. When we get these hits, are they consistent in that correlation, or is it at random and these hits happen whenever luck has it? And is there a pattern that you can pick up yet, or is it too early to tell?
I don't think we've even looked at it from that standpoint as of yet. That might be something that we would look at in the future. We're not that sophisticated at this point. Plus, when you just think about the hits as they come in, it's not in sequence. The hits don't come in sequence.
Right.
They come based on the connection. So
Evidence.
you wouldn't. So I don't know that we would ever be able to provide a correlation between hits and location of occurrence that would have any validity. I don't know that it would ever occur because again, it's based on what's in the system.
For me, it's really an issue of numbers. It's if you got a high number of violent crime occurring in some parts of the city do the hits. I was just curious as to is there a pattern or not.
We'll look at that. We'll look at that. We'll look at that and see if it provides any, like a preponderance of incidents that are occurring based on the hits in a certain geographic area. We'll look at that, see if we can
Appreciate
that and provide the information.
Yeah, and I'll talk with you guys about that. I mean, it could be that in the homicide area, there is the ability, I don't know if it's the ability to show something geographic, but at least to talk about maybe the type or nature of the homicide. I mean, because by definition, Mr. Reyes, these hits involve people who have criminal records.
Right.
So by definition, you're talking about a culture of offenders that are repeat offenders. Maybe not necessarily at this particular type of crime, but they're by and large, I mean, they're probably in state prison for a violent type of crime because that's why they got swabbed, and by definition, we're talking about violence. So we're talking about violent repeat offenders. So already, my guess is that we're likely to be talking about parts of town that have more violence than others. I mean, it seems to me you're onto something. I don't know if we're going to be able to draw a map, but doesn't that, I mean, logically you would.
The hits are random, and the fact that these perpetrators aren't actually just committing crimes in one area, it depends on a lot of variables as far as whether there was forensic evidence left at the scene at a particular crime, and if the person is all over the place committing crimes. You could get a hit on this person, several hits on this one person, but it could be from various parts of the city or even out of state.
Right.
So it would be, I think it would be hard, but it would be definitely worth looking into to see if there's some correlation between violent crime in any one area as it relates to hits.
Right, and just understanding that it's very new and we're learning as we go along. Just keeping that scope of understanding so that we can look at it from policy point of view. What can we do
Yes.
as preventive measures and thinking optimistically as to how we can make a greater city, a better city. And I think these kinds of, this type of analysis might help us there. But as we learn, and as we go through this process, we're going to learn more, and technology will help us advance that level of focus and sensitivity. So I'm just throwing it out there for those purposes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Any other questions on the information item? Thank you all very much. We'll see you at an upcoming hearing with more questions and more answers. Really appreciate the work that all of you do. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Mr. White?
Item 2, motion Parks Perry relative to a donation in the amount of $500,000 from Mercury Insurance to fund police recruit appointment bonuses and related actions.
Minimum, there's a correlation of where the suspect lives.
Good morning, Commander.
Even if he's
In a nutshell, tell us you're here on the second half of the Mercury funding?
Yes, Jim Kanzler, Commander, Commanding Officer of Personnel Group. Yes, the Mayor's Office has received the second installment of $500,000 from Mercury Insurance. It's been given to the CAO's office for depositing. So the program would be effective back of January 2007, retroactive, and we can start, these recruits and candidates can start receiving their money.
Colleagues, are there any questions on the Mercury item?
I've got one question.
Mr. Zine and Mr. Smith.
Commander, it notes here that a $10,000 bonus will be paid to former members of the LAPD who resigned in good standing and are below the rank of sergeant detective who returned to service before March '09.
That is correct. In other words, let's say we have an employee who got his basic post, he did 2 or 3 years, he resigned, and now that person wants to come back, they could qualify for this.
Did he repay the training costs if he left less than 5 years? There's a requirement for them to do that also.
Right, only if they go to another law enforcement agency. So let's say the person left to go to IBM or something, they did it for 6 months or a year, now they want to come back, they could qualify for this bonus.
We're going to pay him $10,000 to come back.
Yes.
But don't they have to do that within 1 year, otherwise their qualifications expire?
I'm sorry, what?
Don't they have to do that within 1 year? You can't be out of law enforcement for more than 1 year, can you, and come back without losing your qualifications and certifications?
Well, it's a restoration, and they would come back, and they wouldn't have to go through a complete academy,
Sure,
and that's the biggest thing. And that's like with laterals, that's why they're getting more, because, let's say they're from San Francisco PD, they quit, they come down here, we can get them through in 8 weeks, and they're out in the streets.
Okay.
And is there also the $1,000 for the individual who recruits them?
For the individual recruit,
No, the individual who recruits them. Say
Yes.
So they'll get $1,000 too.
right, if they're recruited, yes.
And this will take, that's what the money's for, this donation from, contribution from Mercury, earmarked for that?
No,
It's not.
no, the money for Mercury is for the police signing bonus.
Okay, so this bonus is coming out of what budget?
General fund.
Maybe the CAO can speak to that.
I understand we're running out of money, and we're giving money away.
The adopted budget included the revenue from this donation to the VLF fund, so the money is being deposited there, and so it's accounted for in the budget, and we assumed we would receive this donation.
Your name, Patty?
Patty Huber from the CAO.
And this is expected to last how long?
It will not cover the full cost of the signing bonus over the course of this year and next. We will have to put additional resources into the budget for 0809. I do not have the actual numbers in my head at this moment. It will last through March 09 is the sunset date of the bonus.
And
They
if
have to
they-
complete academy by March 09.
So if they come back under this program, receive that bonus, how long do they have to stay before they can leave again?
It's up to 60 months. They would have to stay up to 60 months.
60 months.
Right.
Keep that, so we give them the money, and then if they decide to leave less than 60, we've got to go get the money back?
Yes.
Okay. How many other agencies are doing this type of activity for an incentive?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but there are agencies that do have this type of bonus.
And have we tried anything with housing to assist officers with housing, since that seems to be a major expense?
Yes, I had a meeting with, I can't remember their name right now, from the Community Redevelopment Agency, that they're looking into funding housing, and I've had several meetings with them to pursue that avenue. Where they're at with that, I don't know right now.
Okay. Thank you.
The only question I had is, you said, Patty, that the money will run out in the 0809 budget.
I believe, based on the timing of the program, that we actually will not begin making our first bonus payments until next fiscal year. So the money that was included in this year's budget will roll over to next fiscal year, but then we will have to provide additional resources to pay the bonuses that we anticipate next fiscal year.
That's the second half payment after graduation.
Correct.
So the first half payment, we have enough money through this fiscal year for all the officers, and the backwards that you decided we had to do, which I didn't agree with, but it's, so going back and through the end of this fiscal year for the recruitment plan, we have enough money? And then you have enough money in 0809 for those officers, but not any future recruitment on 0809?
We will have to put additional money into the budget and I just cannot remember the number, but we had charged.
So we don't have enough money for this year, both sides of the money? Money up front and the back.
There was
money.
$1.5 million in this year's budget, and that was not going to be enough to pay for the recruit bonus for the entire term of the program.
That's all right, thank you. So if we get to the point that let's say Prop S fails and we stop recruitment for next year, we still don't have enough money to pay for the whole program for this year.
We would have to look at those numbers again and figure it out, yeah.
Right. I think we're going to want to know that we're taking that in Budget Finance today, the new budget that we're looking at in the event of Prop S failure. We're going to need to know that number, so.
And Matt will be working on that as we develop the
As
budget.
I understand it, if S passes, there's still going to be a deficit.
Yes.
Yes, there will
To the
be.
tune of millions of dollars.
Yes, I can
So
tell you.
one way or another, other money is going to have to be found to continue to support this program.
Correct.
Okay. And where are we now in the numbers? Are we reaching our goals?
Yes, we've hired, I just put a class in December, a class of 50. We're at 367, and we're right on target. We're right on target. In fact, the class that starts today has 70, and that starts for the next 6 months, 70 in the class. And I've already hired for February 21 people, so we're already moving in February. So we're right on target.
It comes the money talk now.
Yeah. Let me just ask, in the sense of what's the attrition then for this year? Is that, when you say on target, is that we're just filling attrition, or we're into the net increase?
That's not the net increase. But right off the top of my head, I don't know what the net increase, but our attrition out of the academy is 15.4%.
No, I mean, attrition in the department. I'm just, because I think originally we were talking 700 and some bodies with 500 attrition and 200 plus net increase. And I'm just wondering, where are we in the sense of the attrition, if we met that goal?
I don't have that off the top of my head, Chief or Councilman. I don't.
Let me just ask Patty, if you could give, because one of the things in looking at the notes, we say no impact on the general fund, but there's going to be significant impact on the dollars that we're going to insert in the budget. If you can give that to the clerk for the report, it'd be important, so everybody will see the clear impact over the next couple of years. Because I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of between $5 and $7 million or something like that.
So you want the cost of the program over?
Yeah, so that the impression is it's $1 million program, but in reality it's a several $1 million program.
Okay, I'll get that number.
Okay. With that, colleagues, let's approve the I guess it's a motion that's before us to
sir.
accept the donation.
Yes.
Okay. Without objection, we will approve it from this committee. Thank you very much. Mr. White?
That concludes your agenda.
All right.
All right. I don't see any public comment cards, Mr. White.
There are none.
So with that, good way to start the year.
Good way to start the year. Very efficient.
I want to thank everybody for being here at 9 o'clock for the 9 o'clock meeting.
Efficiency in government.
Okay.